Let's get to the position where it all starts on offense, and that is quarterback. Last year, freshman sensation Jalen Raynor broke onto the scene. Can we expect Jalen to kind of continue where he left off there in 2023 and 2024?
Yeah, I think so. And I'm really excited to see what his next step is going to be. I mean, this time last year, he had just wrapped up his first spring as an early enrollee, but he was still basically a high school senior. And already, even going back to spring last year, he had a very good demeanor about him. He had very good poise about him for a really young guy. But at this point in time last year, we kind of thought Jalen Raynor might be third on the depth chart for the entirety of 2023. Well, the other quarterbacks that were in the room with them maybe didn't quite play up to the way that the coaching staff thought. And so a few games into the season, Raynor was given the opportunity and he never relinquished it. What was really interesting right out of the gate is the way he was able to mentally handle the position. He made mistakes. Obviously, he's a true freshman. It happens. But we would see him throw an interception, and then on the next drive, he would bounce back and lead the team on a scoring drive. So he was able to shake off those mistakes. He was able to learn from it. He started really, really strong. And then I think about towards the back third of the season, maybe defenses knew what was coming. They were able to scheme for him better. So he had the initial strong start. They made an adjustment. I'm ready to see what adjustment he makes this year in terms of kind of learning from that. I do think that just kind of the intangibles are where we've seen a big step this spring. He's very confident. He's clearly now, even as just going into his sophomore year, a team leader. So I think that's where there's been a big step for him. The physical is there. Great deep ball. Of course, dual threat guy, so he can make the plays on the run. During the intro video, we saw his 65-yard touchdown run against Southern Miss. So he's still got the physical skills. The intangibles are growing as well, as is his football IQ. So it's impossible not to be excited about what he can do as a sophomore.
So recently they had a transfer come in from Central Florida, quarterback Timmy McClain. He came in after spring ball, so obviously he wasn't there for spring ball. It just kind of seems like an interesting move. What can you tell us about that?
I joked around that it's good that there's somebody in that room now old enough to buy a beer, which again, and that's not a knock on Jalen Raynor and freshman Josh Flowers, but you can't do it with one or two. I mean, you just can't. That's so risky. No, even in a perfect season, a helmet comes off, an ankle gets rolled. So you want to make sure that if you have to bring somebody in off the bench, that you're not going to burn Josh Flowers' red shirt, if that's what they're going to try and do there. And they're trying to find other ways to use Malik Hornsby. So even though he could come in that role, you don't necessarily want to do that unless you have to. So you needed the experience, you needed the depth. And then also you need somebody to push Raynor. I do feel like he's the guy. I do feel like this is his job at this point in time, but you need competition in every room. I mean, iron sharpens iron is a very overused phrase, but you need competition there. So I think all in all, this was a good move. I still think Raynor's the guy, but I really like the addition of Timmy McClain.
Yeah, and I think it's actually, in addition to the competition, I think it's a positive for Raynor and the coaching staff, because I can see where if they didn't have a lot of depth behind him, they might be asking him to rein in the running a little bit. And so now you got, a capable backup, and so they can kind of like, let him loose, so to speak.
Yeah, for sure. You're not quite as nervous about, if Rayner goes down, do you have to give the reins to a true freshman and Josh Flowers? You've got somebody capable, and all of these guys have a similar skill set. They're not carbon copies of each other, but they are all three dual threat guys that are in that room. So there are going to be tweaks to the game plan, assuming if there's a different guy that has to go out there, but ultimately you've got guys that can kind of do the same thing. So that helps out in terms of the quarterback position as well.
You've mentioned true freshman early enrollee Josh Flowers a few times. For those not familiar with him, what can you share about him?
Well, he was a one-time Mississippi State commit, and they went through a coaching change, and all of a sudden he became, a free agent. Arkansas State offensive coordinator Keith Heckendorf, I think, might have been the first person to get down there and talk with him. And so obviously made a good impression. Flowers committed. He's one of the highest rated recruits and signees in program history. Just a ton of talent. Unfortunately, didn't get to learn as much about Flowers this spring as I would have liked because he was a little bit hampered for spring ball. And I mentioned this to you guys earlier, kind of jokingly. I'm going to be a broken record when we talk about spring and injuries. There's a lot of situations or position groups maybe that I didn't learn as much about as I would have liked because there were a lot of guys hampered. Flowers was in action for, the first week of spring ball. And I think Butch Jones said something along the lines of like drinking from a fire hose. He's trying to get acclimated to college when he's still technically a high school senior. He's trying to get acclimated to college athletics. He's trying to get acclimated to college and Division I football. So life comes at you fast, I'm sure, in that position. And then shortly after the beginning of spring, he had a tweaked hammy. So he missed a few weeks. And while he was still going through mental reps and things like that, he wasn't able to take part in the drills. He did no live work until probably the final week and a half of spring camp. Flowers did finish strong. He had a good spring game. He threw for over 200 yards. He had a touchdown passing. I think he had a touchdown rushing as well. Yeah. So he was able to close out strong. But again, I just wish that it would have worked out so that we could have seen a little bit more of him.
Yeah, you talk about, drinking from a fire hose. Not only is there the sports aspect of it, but then it's where are my classes? Where do I go to eat? How do I get to the training room? There's a lot of other things that, go into it. And, being an early enrollee, I think really helps because then you kind of go on autopilot when it comes football season because you know where those things are. So
yeah, and I don't know how Jalen Rayner would have fared this fall. I don't think he would have been in the position that he was in to ultimately take over QB1 duties if he had not been there in the spring. Because you get used to the college part of it, the training part of it, and then you can focus on the opponents and things like that in the fall.
Well, let's talk about the running game. The Red Wolves bring back their top 4 rushers from 2023 in Jaquez Cross, Zach Walls, Cedric Hawkins, and the aforementioned Jalen Rayner. How did that room shape up in the spring?
I like this room a lot. We did not see a ton of Wallace or Cross or Hawkins because I don't really feel like this coaching staff felt like they needed to. This was running back. Running back was like the one position that was unscathed by injury in the spring. So I don't think they wanted to tempt fate a little bit. And again, the capabilities there of those 3 guys. They were, the beginning of this season, we saw Zach Wallace kind of right out of the gate be that bruising back, that guy that you're going to put in the power run game when it's a short yardage situation. That's who's going to be out on the field. Jaquez Cross is more of the shifty back. So he's going to be able to juke somebody out of their shoes. He's going to be able to turn when he sees that little opening and be able to make a play happen. And then Cedric Hawkins is just the straight up speed dude. If he gets past you, you're not going to catch him. So it's really cool that all 3 of those guys have just a little bit different of a skill set that depending on the situation, it's going to depend on who's out there and who gets to shine. We saw Hawkins a little bit more towards the end of the season. He didn't get a ton of reps as a true freshman, and also because he had those 2 great guys ahead of him. But I'm really intrigued to see how that 3-headed monster at running back shapes up this fall, carries wise.
And I know you didn't get to see them, But last year you kind of had a 50-50 split between Cross and Wallace. Is that something that maybe it's a 30-30-30 split?
Maybe 40-40-20, because I do think
Okay.
Hawkins this year will be more involved in the offense. I really do. In addition to, Hawkins is a good pass catcher, as is Cross. Wallace can as well, but I feel like that's maybe just a little bit more in Cross and in Hawkins's wheelhouse. So everything is going to be really, really situational. But I feel maybe 40, we'll go 40-40-20 for my prediction on kind of how those carries work out there with those three running backs.
And then Justice kind of touched on it a little bit earlier, but Jalen Raynor had 5 less rushing attempts than their leading rusher Cross. I know sacks are included in college and rushing and whatnot, but do you expect to see the same volume that we saw in 2024, or like with having Timmy McClain and a more capable backup there? Do we continue to see that rushing, or do we see him pull him back?
I think it'll probably be about the same. I do think that overall Jalen Raynor's best strength is actually his arm, especially on the deep ball. He has a good touch on that pass specifically. But I don't think they're going to intentionally. It's kind of like, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. He had good success throwing the ball and running the ball. The best play this season that he made was a running play. So you're certainly going to see him still take off with it quite a bit. But we'll just have to kind of wait and see in terms of the exact mixture there.
The passing game also brings back most of the crew from 2023. They do lose Jeff Foreman to graduation, but they bring back Corey Rucker, Courtney Jackson, Reagan Ely, Adam Jones, and others. How did the wide receiver room look in the spring?
A little bit incomplete because there was, again, a couple of injuries there. Adam Jones started out the season without really being in the mix. He was able to finish the spring in a couple of practices, but he was still in a no-contact jersey. Corey Rucker was in a no-contact jersey to start the spring. He was out by about the midway point. The good news, by the way, with almost every single last one of these injuries I have mentioned or will mention, is that with very few exceptions, these are injuries that will not impact the fall. So, for example, Rutgers, I believe, was a knee, but it was a non-surgical situation. But because of that, you're down a couple of really key contributors. I do really like the wide receiver room overall. I feel like there is upside there. Courtney Jackson is just Mr. Consistent, man. He is so steady there as a slot receiver. I feel like Corey Rucker last year, he was hurt his entire 2022 campaign when he was at South Carolina before he transferred back to Arkansas State. He was at A-State, then a year at South Carolina, then back at A-State last year. And I feel like because of that injury last year, maybe he started a little bit slow, but then he was really playing well at the end of the season. I think he's going to be able to pick up there where he left off. And then you add in, Reagan Ely has got a ton of experience at this point in time. Adam Jones is going to be healthy this fall. He'll be able to contribute. You add in a guy like Reginald Harden. You've got a real speedster like Tennell Bryant, who's going to be on the two deep. And I think overall there's a lot of different kind of pieces in this room that are really complementary.
So you mentioned earlier about them bringing in Malik Hornsby via the transfer portal. And so, what we've heard so far is he's not there to play quarterback. He's there to play receiver. But what kind of role do you see him playing for the team in 2024?
Well, about that not there to play quarterback thing, he played a decent amount of quarterback this spring. And part of that was due to, the injury of Flowers. They were really limited in that room. So Hornsby was able to get some work. But the deal with Hornsby is ultimately they like him a lot. They like his playmaking ability. So they're going to try and find a lot of different ways to get the ball in his hand. Some of that is going to be as a wide receiver, line him up outside. He's got good size. He's got good speed. See what happens. But some of that, they're going to throw him in there and probably a couple of wildcat packages. He's obviously, when you've got a guy who can throw like that, that's a great trick play guy, for sure. So I don't think that at this point in time right now, I'm quite ready to put Malik Hornsby into one box. I think he's going to be a little bit of a jack of all trades, and we're going to see him make some plays in several different aspects in 24.
So last season, Corey Rucker and Courtney Jackson kind of ran this, as far as snaps, they were about the same. Mm-hmm. And receptions and yards fairly close. But there's a big disparity in number of touchdowns. Jackson had 7 compared to Rucker only had 2. For those that perhaps don't watch Arkansas State, is there something with their usage and how they're used that kind of led to that disparity, or just kind of the way it happened?
Well, I think partly, Jackson's got a tiny bit more speed, so that's probably a little bit of it, especially since Rutgers started the season a little bit slower. And again, he was really up to speed at the end of the year, but I kind of picture, Jackson is a guy a lot of times they're going to find in the middle of the field. Sometimes Rutgers is a little bit more down the sideline, more so it's easier to push a guy out of bounds and things like that. And that's not concrete across the board. Each of those guys are going to make plays in different areas of the field. But I think the slow start, I think their usage explains a little bit of that disparity. I would expect Corey Rucker to lead the team in touchdowns in 2024.
Awesome.
All right. Jacksonville State also returns 2 tight ends in Miller McCrumbie and Emmanuel Stevenson. If you were to describe the tight end usage to someone who has never caught a game before, how would you describe their usage?
It's been really interesting to watch Butch Jones use his tight ends over the past 3 years when he's been at the helm. I'll be honest with you, flashing back to 2021, I honestly don't remember how much they used that position in terms of receiving. But in 2022, it was actually a tight end that led the team in receiving yards and in targets, and that was Seydou Traore. And Seydou Traore was just, obviously, he was a great pass catching tight end. He was kind of that prototypical, like when people say, the tight end is always open, they're talking about a guy like Seydou Traore. When you've got those 3rd and medium situations, 3rd and 5, 3rd and 6, that was the go-to guy. And more often than not, he converted. And then after his really phenomenal sophomore season, he left. So you had some different guys in there last year. Emmanuel Stevenson is good at both pass catching and blocking. However, he got hurt after about game 8 or so and was not back yet for the spring. Miller McCrumbie is maybe a little bit, he's good in both aspects as well. I do think he's a good pass catching tight end, but he was still getting a little bit more experience last year. I think he's going to be able to take a big step this year going into 2024. So I think we'll see more usage in the receiving game of the tight ends than last year, but not as much as 2022. And they'll do that. Butch Jones likes his 2 tight end sets at the goal line and things like that. So you'll see some of that, but how much the tight end is used in the receiving game will be totally dependent upon personnel.
So the offensive line didn't fare too bad in terms of returning production. I'm not sure about injuries, but they did have quite a bit returning this year. They did lose starting right guard Jalen Cunningham and Hamilton Hall to graduation. Well, I take that back. We know that they suffered a pretty big loss in all Sun Belt center Jacob Baer to a torn ACL in spring practice, which is certainly a bummer. How will this team look to kind of fill that void? How did that group look, I guess, in the spring?
Yeah, it was another group where it was kind of hard to wrap your head around what this group is going to look like in the fall, because you had, of course, the big injury was to Jacob Baer starting at center, who is just so good. You mentioned the All Sun Belt accolades. You go through and you look through the Pro Football Focus grades and the rankings there, and he was evaluated as the 2nd best center in FBS last year. Just so good. So obviously that's a blow, and that's a blow from a football perspective. That's a blow. He was considered an incredibly important team leader, and obviously he's still around, but it's not quite the same when a guy's not able to get on the field with you. In addition to that, at the last week or so of spring camp, and actually a little bit before that because he was a little bit hobbled, but left tackle Noah Smith broke his ankle. So you were without for the spring game and for the final week of camp, both the projected starting center and the projected starting left tackle. Smith will be back in time for fall camp, and they are already kind of freaking out in a positive way about the speed of Baer's recovery. But the world's fastest ACL recovery for a football player you're still looking at like 6 months, and the injury was right around April 1st. So if you're targeting October or November, Obviously, he's still got a backup plan. They really liked the way that Mason Myers progressed this spring. He's a redshirt freshman, or will be heading into his redshirt freshman season. And he was a guy that didn't play center in high school, was learning about the position. And when Bayer first went down, it was a little scary. There were some not great snaps from the guys that were backing him up. But as everybody got a little bit more accustomed to those roles, we saw some progress. And by the end of spring, they were really, really pleased with Myers' growth. And I guess that's the plan now in the fall. I think there are some other options. McKeelan Thomas is a very versatile offensive lineman. I would expect to see him at right tackle. But when there was a emergency with Jacob Bayer in game 12 last year, ahead of the Marshall game, like 2 hours before the game, they found out he was not going to be available. It was McKeelan Thomas that stepped in and played at center. So there could be some shifting there on the line. Although right now I think it might be Myers for game 1. We'll see.
If you had to pick an offensive player to have a breakout type season in 2024, who would that be?
I think on offense, one of the things there is that there's so many knowns. If you go back and look at returning production, and I use Bill Connolly's rankings at ESPN because he's been covering college football forever and has his own metrics for that. I think back in February, A-State was 8th overall in returning offensive production. So you know what the running back room is capable of. You've seen these receivers. You've seen Jalen Rayner. But I'm going to go with incoming transfer receiver Reginald Harden. He is actually a D2 transfer. I think it was Benedict College is where he was at last year. And the thing that immediately jumps out at you about Harden is his size. He's 6'5". And the past couple of years, I wouldn't necessarily say that A-State has been really undersized at wide receiver, but they haven't had a guy like that. And when you've got a guy, especially in the Sun Belt where corners are still around that 5'11", 6 foot even range, when you've got a guy that's 6'5", I mean, he's on a sideline, he's in the corner of the end zone, he's just going to be able to reach up and get it. I think the thing that he'll have to adjust to the most is the different level of physicality going from Division II to Division I. But if he is able to make that adjustment, I think he can be a huge asset to that wide receiving room. So that's kind of what I'm trying to speak into existence. We know so much about that offensive talent. I want to see what Reginald Harden can do.